Chuck.
Good evening, gentlemen and everyone.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you. John, I just responded to your email.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought I'd ask it at least just to. I gotcha. Yep. So either way, even if we were at 4, it would still be a 3 to be a quorum. So,
Right,
yeah, okay.
or just
All
over.
right. Yeah, anything over 2. Jen just posted that she's on her way, so she should be here momentarily. So. Okay. Jen is joining us now. Hello, Jen.
Hey guys.
Hello, Jen.
All right. All right. We do have a quorum in attendance now, so I will call the regular meeting of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District to order on Thursday, April 8th. And first item of business is setting of the meeting agenda. Jackie Anderson will not be able to join us this evening, so we will be postponing item A under old business, the Comfort and Little Comfort Lakes diagnostic report and presentation. We'll be postponing that till our next regular meeting. And we wanted to add an item. So I think we'll move currently item B under old business up to A, the 2020 water monitoring report, and add an item B for a board manager appointment from Washington County. Just a quick discussion on any actions that we think we might have to take, either Mike or the board, to try to get this appointment moved up a bit for Chris. So is there any other changes or additions to the agenda, anyone?
I just have a question. This agenda is different than what's posted on the web.
Yeah, she's fixing it. There's the right one.
Okay, all right, thank you. I thought I'd missed something along the way here. Like
you
about
read
8 items.
Didn't you read all that stuff, Steve?
Well, I was wondering, wow, I only got 8 hours and maybe I needed 12 or 15.
All right. So yes, this is the agenda. So we'll postpone item A under old business. We'll move item B up to item A, and we'll add an item B for the board manager appointment from Washington County. Is that good? Is that everything? Okay.
I'll make the motion to accept the agenda as proposed by John.
A second.
All right. Motion been made and seconded. Any other discussion? I'll call the roll. Manager Schmalz.
Aye.
Manager Oakney.
Aye.
Manager Spence. Aye. All right. The first item under new business is the Gallagher classification and compensation study. I'll kick it over to Mike and let him take it from there.
Mr. President, managers, as noted in the memo, so the board approved the scope all the way back in September of 2019. I knew it had been at least a year. I didn't realize it had been that long in duration. Of course, we did have a little hiatus of our work due to the COVID pandemic. And so that interrupted our ability to make progress as planned. But there are two individuals from Gallagher. So the names on the screens there are actually their first names, and then the Gallagher is the company name, of course. But these have been, this has been a very detailed effort. Manager Anderson and Manager Spence have also had the opportunity here in the last couple of months to assist myself and Ellen Hendricks to review that. And I think Ellen is listening by phone, so she's participating in the meeting this evening as well. And we do have a scheduled staff meeting to review this tomorrow morning, a couple hours to go over it with them. And then on Monday afternoon, then we will, we're setting up individual meetings with each staff member to go over more things more specific to each individual. So with that, we'll let, I'm not sure if Mike or Megan, I think, has been our kind of our day-to-day most recently. And Alishka was also participating. She's been on maternity leave, but I don't know, Mike or Megan, which one is going to take the lead, but go ahead.
I'm going to try and get out of the way as soon as possible, so you get to hear the real brains of the operation, everything, and Megan. But I think, Megan, were you going to share your screen?
You
Quick
should
as
see
well,
it
I
now,
believe.
hopefully, just
Looks
the
good.
the first slide. Perfect.
Okay, it might just be delayed on my end. No worries then. No worries at all. So yeah, pleased to be here. Thanks very much. We'll try to get through this, and please stop us if you have any questions at all. We had the pleasure of working with Mike and the team, and I get to hear about it through Megan and all this stuff, and just having the conversations. But you got one of the best in the business with Megan going through all this. So we'll try and get through the quick intros and get into the meat of the project here as quick as possible. So, all right, we're gonna go through a quick background, talk a little bit about the classification and job evaluation piece, because that's the place we need to start is understanding the work to make sure that we have all the other pieces that make sense. Because if we're not understanding the work, we're not getting the right market data, we're not having the right internal equity, all those pieces that go into it. All right, and then Megan will talk about the compensation and pull it all together for what those recommendations are in relationship to the positions. All right, let's keep going here. So on this one, we were contracted. We're Gallagher. We're located. Megan and I are both in the Minneapolis office. Megan's actually a lot closer to your region. I live in South Minneapolis. She's up in the northeast suburbs. But we're from around here. We're do public sector compensation across the state of Minnesota as well as the country. But we are tasked with developing, updating the classification structure, which mainly means understanding the work that's being done at the district to make sure that we are documenting that work correctly, we're matching the jobs correctly in the market, and we have the correct internal equity. Internal equity is important for evaluating those jobs for compliance with the Local Government Pay Equity Act in Minnesota that needs to be reported to every 3 years, so you don't have non-compliance, which has a potential impact on funding. And then also collect market data from relevant sources, and then build that salary structure. So we are looking at base pay. That's important. We know that benefits are always a big factor in some of these positions here, but we do view those as kind of the two sides of the same coin in a way. Both of those need to be evaluated and compared, but we need to make sure that base pay is something that's relevant, because sometimes the benefits have a different level of perceived value for all of your employees based on different life stages and the situations that are relevant to them as well. So a little bit more complexities when it comes into that comparisons. All right, we can keep going on here. So methodology and the classification piece, reviewing the current job descriptions. Alishka was there. She held discussions with all the employees to receive clarifications, make sure that we understand the work. That's a process that we like to do with all of our clients, regardless of the size of them, because all those jobs are unique. Now, we're pretty good at reading through job descriptions and understanding that work, but we want to make sure we hear about it from the employees because it's different interpretations of the way things are written. So from that, we're looking at the different families of work, classification titles, nature of work, and develop those 10 classification titles, but also for that's like kind of future growth. Probably in 2 years, 3 years from now, you may have jobs that exist that aren't there now. And we want to make sure there's a spot and a process to make sure that those jobs can be placed in there appropriately when they become needed. And some of those jobs that you have now may not exist in the same way that they are defined now. And so making sure that Mike and the team know how to kind of manage and administer the system, and we're always there to help on an ongoing basis as well. We don't go away at the end of this project either. Sorry, you can't lose us that fast, I guess. So, the methodology that we're using for evaluating the jobs then is a method called the decision band method. Now, we use this for numerous organizations across Minnesota, as well as across the country. It's been around for a long time. It can be used in multiple size organizations. We've used it for years for Red Lake Watershed District, and they're smaller than you all as well. But it is a methodology to say, how do we evaluate and compare and contrast these jobs internally, looking to the internal levels? So know that some jobs have a similar level of decision-making and complexity. Some have a higher level, some have a lower level. So we're looking at that to make sure that we can blend the market data with the internal alignment. But ultimately, this does help to have the compliance with the Local Government Pay Equity Act. So you have those point values. So here's where these jobs are placed. Here's how we develop the pay structure. So we can talk a lot more about the decision band method and everything. We're here to help support Mike and the team to make sure that they understand when a job changes, because we know a job's going to change in the future. How can we help reevaluate that within that overall structure? And we help many of our clients on an ongoing basis do that, whether it's counties, cities, school districts across the state as needed. So the next slide really does kind of show what the method is. It is meant to be a process. We're not trying to add up points to put a job into a pay grade. For instance, we're trying to say, here's the band that a job goes into. Now, in an organizational theory is what this is kind of based on. The guy who designed this studied organizations and different levels of decisions that are made in any type of organization. And so these 6 levels describe that. For example, we're speaking to you all right now. You guys are all at band F. You are the policy board for the Comfort Lake Watershed District. That's your decision here. What's our scope? What's our direction? What's our goals? How are we going to set that strategy for this organization? Now, Mike and the team are going to be taking that into action at different levels based upon the responsibilities of their jobs. So we want to place the job first in the right band that exists. Then in step 2, we want to look at the relationship of those jobs internally with regards to supervision, responsibilities, and everything. And then in step 3, you get really down into the nuances and the details of the jobs. Say, now, how can we bifurcate between these 2 jobs that might be in the same band together? Do they have a different level of complexity to them? And so that's where we get into these different the different levels of details within it. And we can totally nerd out on this for a while if you want us to or anything like that. But I'm going to hand it, unless there's any questions on this first half. This first half of the project really does look internally to the district to say, what are the jobs? Make sure we understand those. Look at the internal equity. That's one half to the equation. The other half that Megan's going to talk about is the market data and how we collect, analyze, summarize, and then combine that with this internal equity. So if there's no questions, or please stop us if you do later on. Megan's going to proceed.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike mentioned, kind of that was the internal study of the jobs. And then the next step is to go external with the compensation study piece of that. So there's 2 main sources of data that we'll kind of talk through here. One being that we conducted a custom survey as part of this process to collect compensation data from relevant local districts. We did this by sending them a survey instrument, following up with phone calls and emails to encourage participation in the survey. We received all of that data. We performed many reviews of that data, followed up where we had questions. We want to make sure that the jobs are a good content match, not just a title match, all those other things, just making sure that all of the data makes sense to us. So with that survey, then the list here on this slide shows who we sent the survey to on that custom piece. So we had 13 that participated, an additional 2 did not participate, and then the final 2 were excluded just because they only have 1 contracted administrator. So that's a little bit different. Overall, though, 13 out of 17 organizations participating is excellent participation rate. You know, it's good to have all of that different data so that we have a solid, sufficient data set for which to work with in all of the analysis. The other side, the other main source of data then, we have an extensive published survey library that we purchase those surveys on an annual basis to help with 2 things. One, it can help supplement public sector data, where maybe we just didn't feel we had sufficient data for a particular job from the custom survey, but then also helps you represent the private sector, at least to some extent, understanding that at the district, you're going to have at least some jobs that are in some ways in competition with the private sector for those positions. They kind of cross over those 2 industries. So we use CompData, Mercer, Willis Towers Watson. These are nationally conducted salary surveys that are used nationwide by many different organizations. They're sort of like the gold standard in compensation, if you will, for purposes of collecting that published market data. So those are the 2 main sources. We collect all of that data from those sources and analyze it as a few different points in the market. Market 25th percentile, looking at where 25% of data falls below and 75% falls above. Similar with the 50th percentile, that's basically the median or the middle of the market. And then looking at the 75th percentile as well. Now this helps to provide context, and we definitely had conversations around some of these pieces, but the majority of organizations, I would say more than 85–90% really are targeting themselves at the 50th percentile. Saying we want to meet the market, we want to be at the middle of the market to ensure that we are paying a competitive rate. So that was really the focus of this study as well, was that 50th percentile, which you'll see as we kind of hone in on that in the next few slides. With all of the data that we have, I mentioned that, you know, with great participation, that helps to have a sufficient data source. Part of that is that we follow the U.S. Department of Justice and federal trade guidelines that require 5 job matches per job in order to make conclusions or conduct analysis. So from that custom market, for example, if we're looking at an accountant job, we need to have at least 5 organizations with sufficient content matches to that accountant job in order to report that information. From the custom survey, 7 of 9 of the jobs that we surveyed met this criteria. And then when we add those published survey sources, we had sufficient data for all 9 jobs that were included in the salary survey. Once we have all of that data together, we've had that data set reviewed, we start making just a few adjustments to kind of make sure we're comparing everything on an apples to apples basis. So the first part of that is to apply geographic differentials. We use the Economic Research Institute to identify these differentials. They have a proprietary method of analysis to help calculate what is the difference between different locations. So we have that as a resource that we used here. For example, what we mean by that is you can see Minnesota is 1.03. This indicates to us that Minnesota data on average is 3% different from Forest Lake. So any Minnesota-based data was adjusted by 3% to be effective for your local labor market. So that's the first adjustment. The second piece of that is also to age all data to a common effective date of January 1, 2021. Especially with those published survey sources, some might publish in April, some might publish in March. We just want to make sure that everything is as of a consistent date. So we trend all of that forward to a common date. using the World at Work prevailing market trend of 3% per year for actual salaries and 2% for salary structure. So that means that according to the World at Work survey, they survey, thousands of organizations nationwide to basically say, by what percent are your salaries moving? And by what percent are your actual salary ranges, your minimum, midpoint, and maximum moving? So that's what those factors are. And it helps us to say, well, there's 5 months difference between the data and the January 1 date. So let's trend that forward. So those are the adjustments that are made. And then ultimately, basically all of that data is combined for comparison to the district. And for that comparison, just to provide context, now there are nuances, which we'll get a little bit more into on the next slide here. But as context, it's plus or minus 5% is generally considered highly competitive with the market. Plus or minus 5 to 10% is considered competitive. When you get to 10 to 15, there's possible misalignment, and then more than 15% indicating misalignment with the market. So ultimately then, all of the data that we had for the 9 jobs that were included, that was adjusted to be kind of on a consistent basis, we calculated that overall difference between the market and the district, again, at that 50th percentile, where the majority of organizations are going to target themselves. The 50th percentile, again, represents the competitive market or middle of the market, where the majority of organizations are targeting. Now, time to reach a fully competitive market rate or the 50th percentile does vary by job, but commonly is going to require 5 to 10 years in position, depending on strategy, different performance processes that might be in place, just other factors that organizations are using to manage that. For example, if I became an accountant tomorrow, I cannot expect to be at the market 50th or a fully competitive rate. It's going to take time for me to learn that job and become fully competent in the role to be paid kind of at that middle of the market spot. But overall, the district jobs from the 9 positions we looked at are 11.1% below and 10.3% below the 50th percentile of the custom, again, only including the districts that we sent the survey to, and the full markets, where that includes those published survey sources, respectively. So again, as I mentioned on the slide previously, we do have a framework to say if you're within 10 to 15%, that is potential misalignment with the market. That's also it's not an end all be all, now it means that we need to adjust everything by 11% or 10%. There are other factors, performance, time and position, that are going to have an impact on the difference between the district and the market salaries. Just as I said with my accountant example, if I became an accountant tomorrow, I can't expect to be paid at the 50th percentile necessarily. But if there's someone in that organization that's been doing that job for 10, 15 years, they should be. It's likely that our salaries are going to be, a fair difference between the two. So again, seeing the 10 and 11%, that doesn't indicate all positions require an increase. It is, here's what we need with the salary information. Let's combine that then with the internal review to develop a market competitive salary structure, which ensures that that structure is going to be competitive. And then it facilitates employees progressing towards that fully competitive market rate over time, depending on that strategy. So on the next slide, we're getting into the combination then of the 2 pieces of the puzzle, being the internal look at the jobs and the external look at the market. And I've gone through kind of a lot of adjustments. Any questions at this stage?
Nope.
All right.
Oh, just one question. When you adjust to the common January 2021 date, how is that done? If most people have a current salary matrix and so forth, so why would that be out of date? that you'd have to move it up 2% or 3%.
Yeah, I think you're right. Most organizations, when you're looking at the districts, they're going to have that matrix in place, for example, but it's more of like the published survey sources, even a little bit more, because they are going to, like, if they publish their survey in May, and then all of a sudden another survey, to just more extreme example, publishes in January, like, well, between that time of those two, the salaries would have moved. It's a point in time.
Okay.
So that they're going to report salaries that are effective as of a date. And then by the time you use that, it's just time has passed, and you can fairly assume from those published survey data that the salaries then will have shifted in that window of time.
So for example, I think our last salary survey was done maybe 2 years ago and was supposed to be good for 2 or 3 years with some minor adjustments. So if we haven't adjusted that salary range, it should be adjusted for 1.5 years or 2 years or whatever we're behind the time frame on. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think in a way, because we're showing that that it's going to probably account for some of the percentage that Megan just went through with regards to how much the salaries are below the market, because if the ranges haven't been adjusted for those 2 years, then that's going to be part of it. You know, it's going to be a 4 to 5% off. The typical adjustment that we have seen, the market typically moves for a salary structure adjustment about 2%. Actual pay is moving about 3% every year,
Right.
on average, across multiple functions and all that kind of stuff. So what Megan's saying is that, hey, the salary survey is published on January 1, 2020. It's effective that date. We want to make sure that we're not using old data. So we have to make sure we age that data to the date that you all want it to be effective, using that trend of what folks have, organizations have actually increased their pay by.
Right. So that would be a 2% increase. But if if your salary survey was current as of June of 2020, then it'd only be a 1% increase, right? Because it's only 6
Correct.
months. I asked the question because, you know, it's pretty easy if you misapply those 2 and 3% numbers to get a deviation of 5 to 10% off what the norm is that you're recommending that we make decisions on. So that's why I asked the question.
Yep.
Follow what I'm saying? I mean, those are highly
question.
leveraged numbers if you don't manage them very carefully. So, and it could could easily explain the differences that we're seeing between our scale and what you're saying in the marketplace scale.
Correct.
So did you increase our salary schedule then by that much also, or not?
No, we want to compare the market to your current schedule so it can show how off it is, but then use the market data that Megan collected in order to create the new pay structure.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right. Thank you.
All right, so this slide is really just explaining that ultimately then the goal is to combine the internal or job evaluation with the market data that we collected. So this chart is simply an illustration of that combining of the internal and external data. It shows the green line is the district salaries, so you can see where it's falling below the market. And then the light blue line is the quote unquote full market, including the published survey sources, with the darker blue being the custom market. So it's kind of illustrating the overall percent difference that we talked about on the previous slide. But then also what this chart shows us is with these R-squared values that you're kind of seeing of 0.95 and 0.93 means there's a strong relationship between all of the data that we've collected, between that internal and external, which gives us high confidence then in the eventual salary structure that is developed, because ultimately that salary structure is developed using these lines that balance both the internal and the external data.
Just a question on that. On a correlation analysis like that, with the sample size as small as you have, what's the standard deviation on those two curves?
Oh
Plus
man,
or
you'd have
minus
to go back.
25 and 30%?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have to go back to the regression output, Megan, to see that on the detail that we have in there. You're exactly right. It's going to be incredibly low when it
Well,
comes
it's
to
gonna be incredibly
the
high,
sample
isn't it?
size.
Because you only
Well,
got
yeah.
so basically there's really no difference between the two curves. The lines. I mean, statistically speaking, you can make it a difference, but I mean, statistically speaking, with that small of a sample, I'm not sure there's going to be a significant difference.
No, not at all. And that's kind of the
I
intent
guess
of
I
it,
raised
so
the
that there's
question. You
not.
could check it out, but I've done a lot of regression analysis and
Mhm.
I've looked at a lot of data, and I suspect that this is not much different on small sample sizes.
Yep. And the to show in kind of a graphical format to say, hey, this where the district salaries are lower is at that lower end of the range. Like that,
Right.
You're competitive about that executive director, but the trend is pulling it down. So it's like, hey, the shift is going to be slight at that bottom end. That's where the difference lies.
Right. Thank you.
All right, so then the next slide here is just the chart representation of that eventual structure, again, where we anchored this on the previous chart there, where the range midpoint mirrors that market so that it's anchored at the middle of the market, and then calculating range minimum and range maximum around that so that the district can pay above and below that market rate at that 50th percentile. You can see how the DVL, the internal values connect to that scale as well. So ultimately then we perform calculations to place employees into this updated salary structure, where it's saying anyone with salary below the new proposed minimum were brought up to that point. Using this methodology, it would require 2 employees with adjustments of a cost of just over $4,000. So that concludes kind of the overview of the study. The next recommendations then would be adopt the classification structure, DBM ratings, which will help with the local government pay equity compliance, implement the recommended salary structure, and then just moving forward, ongoing administration of it. Mike sort of mentioned earlier that it's a snapshot in time. So you want to have continual review of that internal alignment and classification of jobs so that when positions are changing, maybe new positions are implemented, the internal hierarchy is reflected accordingly. And that's something where the district can determine, you want to manage that internally, or we can be an ongoing resource to help respond to any of those questions as positions change and evolve over time. So that's how to make, just thinking about maintaining then kind of the DBM ratings and the classifications from an internal standpoint, but then also from an external standpoint, as we've sort of talked about, in an ideal world, the salary structure is adjusted by a trend factor somewhere around 2%. It can vary a little bit, but usually it's somewhere around there to remain competitive with the market. Now that sometimes is an ideal world, and sometimes it's maybe every other year. Some places have gone every 3 years. That maybe is a little bit further than the comfort zone, but sometimes it just comes down to what is feasible. And then beyond that, looking at conducting a survey again, similar to this one, about every 3 to 5 years, so that you can help validate that those annual adjustments that have been made have kept the district in a competitive position relative to the market.
I just want to add quick, Megan, can we go back just for the salary structure adjustment? I think one of the nice things that the way that the structure is built here is that midpoint that Megan developed, that midpoint is based upon that regression equation. So the midpoint itself is updated by that 1.5, or 2%, and then the ranges are recalculated off of that midpoint again. So it has a more consistency to the overall framework as opposed to adjusting the minimum, midpoint, and maximum by a same percentage, which kind of slowly erodes the framework over time. So.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Mike. Mike, did you want to add some stuff? Mike Kinney?
Yes, Mr. President, managers, I just kind of wanted to add, because Manager Smalls brought it up, the previous study was completed 3 years ago and was supposed to be good for 2 years. And so we've had in essence, a gap year here without that information. And that being said, so we know that Gallagher had completed a similar study for 3 other watershed districts. And one thing I would hope is that the watershed districts in MOD as a whole would consider entering into an agreement with Gallagher to do, watershed districts, not only across the metro, but across the state, because that would be certainly beneficial for all parties. So this has been a very interesting and detailed process, I think, for both Ellen and I. So we really appreciate the immense amount of time that Gallagher has afforded us in going through this process. I did have experience working I worked at a county, basically SWCD. The county had gone through a similar study, and it was more aligned with this, doing interviews and collecting a lot more information about the roles, and then coming out that. So I think from that standpoint, the study will be, in the results, both the classification and compensation will be more beneficial to the district going forward. And I think that some of the key, points again will be made, what that's the staff meeting and future meetings. It really also depends on the length of experience and some of these other factors that Megan has talked about. And we currently, she is developing a recommendation for the district on each individual. So we'll be able to utilize that as then a key point for decision making on that, and then also help us with our budgeting for 2022. And well, want to make sure that I talk to the board about that as we get into the budget season. So, but overall, yeah, very. I think Manager Anderson, if she was here and she sent me a text before the meeting, she was very impressed as well. Overall in the process, and I think I guess I know Ellen and I were very impressed in terms of the process and the information that was provided. So thank you.
As Mike had said, that Manager Anderson and I were involved in some of the reviews of the information and understanding the information early on, and I was impressed as well. And it was nice to see that we pulled this tool together for Mike to use for making sure that our staff salaries are as competitive as they can be, so that we treat the employees the way they need to be treated. And it was great to see the thorough approach that was taken here. So I appreciated it a lot. I don't know if we got to see under the covers a little bit, but we certainly got to see some of the things that go into doing this sort of thing. And it looks like you guys have done a very good job here. So thank you so much. Any other questions for Gallagher, Steve?
No, I just want to reinforce Mike's comment about trying to have this work through MOD as a total watershed district project across the state. That would increase the accuracy of the survey also, even though there are regional differences, because your sample size would be a lot larger. But I think it's something that the MOD should really take on. It's a shame that Manager Anderson isn't here, but she would have to carry that torch for us into the MOD meetings, just since she's on that board now. But that would make it even more efficient and get more people to cooperate, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be more cost effective for everyone also.
Yep.
And plus give Gallagher more business too, I'm sure. I know that when I was at a Fortune 500 company, I know they all cooperated together regionally here on salary surveys, because they were all competing against each other. And they just worked together and used one survey, and everybody worked off the same survey sheet. So,
Jen, anything from you? All right. Then we have a motion, a recommended motion here on the screen to accept the classification and compensation study for the use in salary management. Yeah, Jen.
I'll move to accept the classification and compensation study for use in the salary management by the district.
And I'll second that.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Any other discussion? Call the roll. Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Oknick,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right, thank you, Mike and Megan, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Good job.
Yep. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Good place to work with.
Thank you.
Thanks
Have a
very
good
much.
evening.
Good night.
Bye.
All right, next item of business will be the Bone Lake Northeast Wetland Restoration Scope of Work.
Mr. President, managers, we have Kyle Crawford here from EOR. He'll be kind of the lead engineer on it, but just yeah, a little background on this. This was as noted, it's like directly on the northeast corner of Bone Lake, almost within, not exactly throwing distance from Manager Oknick's house, but you could, maybe hit a good golf ball from there. But Burrow Halderson was a resident there. She had the last home on that street just before the wetland. And, a few years ago, she had asked me to come out and look at all the EWM that was growing, which likes nitrogen. And during that conversation, she informed me that there used to be a dairy farm right on that corner. So some aerial photography work quickly established that, yes, there were the one photo in 1964, you could see the cows right, in the barnyard on the edge of the wetland. So then we proceeded to do the similar kind of coring sample work that we did out in the Matson farm. So we've been able to turn this around fairly quickly and to Bowser for a grant application. And staff, particularly Blaine, has been working a lot with the landowners out there. And so right now we have here a memo from EOR regarding the feasibility assessment proposed scope of work, and hopefully, well, goes well, we could maybe get this project done before even a couple of our other ones. Go ahead, Kyle. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening. Just a quick reminder, I haven't been before the board in a few months, but I'm Kyle Crawford, Water Resource Engineer with EOR. I've worked on a number of district projects over the years: Shields Lake Reuse, Moody Wetlands, Hilo Lane, Iron Enhanced Sand Filter. So as Mike mentioned, I'll be the project manager, project engineer for this project. And at this point, we're just looking for approval to go through phase one, which would be the preliminary design feasibility stage. As you can see there, that'd be tasks 1 through 3, which would be just the project management and working through preliminary easements with the landowner. Task 2 is field data collection. So that'd be picking up some additional survey out there, some field work. And then task 3 would be the bulk of the phase 1 work, which would be preliminary design and modeling. At that point, we'd be targeting the May board meeting to come back with a feasibility report, feasibility design for final project ordering. And moving into phase 2, which would be final design and construction, bidding and construction administration, which, yeah, hopefully we'd be targeting to get this built yet in winter of 21 and 22.
Good. Any questions for Kyle from Steve or Jen?
Looks good.
Yeah. I didn't have any questions myself. So I guess if there's no other questions, we have a motion to authorize the phase one here.
I'll move that we authorize phase one per the recommendation not to exceed $15,938.
I'll second.
All right, motion been made and seconded. Any other discussion on the motion? I will call the roll. Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Oakman,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right. Go forth in phase one. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks, EOR.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would just note a small procedural matter that the recommended motion was to enter into an agreement for the entire scope of work, but then per your direction, Mike would authorize phase one only. So that's consistent with your motion, but it would be reflected in an agreement that incorporates the entire scope.
Okay, gotcha. So we're approving the entire scope, but we're only approving funding at this point for the first phase.
Yes,
I
basically.
can amend my motion to include that added detail.
Do we need to adjust the motion, Chuck?
Well, if there's consensus, I mean, if there's consensus that your action was to adopt the recommended motion, then the minutes can just reflect that.
Right, I think the intention was to adopt the recommended motion from the memo. So, and that does cover the whole thing, so. Okay. And no objections to that from the other board?
No,
members?
I'm fine with
Okay,
that.
Good, all right. All right then. All right, let's go to the item A under old business, the 2020 water monitoring report. So basically, we had reviewed this report at in the past board meeting, and then we were waiting for the Met Council and the camp data to be updated. So that has happened. So the report has been finalized. Are there any other guidance for adopting the report at this point, Mike or Megan?
Mr. President, managers, I did include just a quick summary so you could see what the changes were, since
Okay.
I didn't redline them or anything, so it's a clean final copy. But
Sure.
essentially, we knew that total phosphorus concentrations for 2020 might be slightly different, and they were very, very close. So you could look back on this slide. I think that'll be posted to the website just to see. And there were some other errors they caught in chlorophyll and Secchi. So just for thoroughness and transparency, the slight corrections are recorded and then they've been made. And we've gone through the entire report and updated figures and all the numbers. So it reflects the final data that Met Council will submit to the state database. And then I also wanted to note there was one other change that we did make as part of using the monitoring data to calibrate our hydrologic H&H models. We've been working in the Bone Lake watershed, and so looking at the Bone Lake outlet data, that's where the fish barrier is. We realized an adjustment needed to be made on how we develop that rating curve to better reflect blockages downstream of that outlet that adjusted, the water depth compared to the flow. So there's just a quick figure you can see that essentially the overall flow and load decreased by a fair amount compared to the initial prediction, but that better reflects the actual flow and load coming out of Bone Lake into the downstream waters. So I included that as well, and that's updated in the final version. Otherwise, it's the same. None of the recommendations or summaries changed, since the lake data really didn't change all that much.
Okay. Any questions for Megan on the updated report before we move to approve it? All right. So a motion to approve the water monitoring report is in order.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear, but I'll move to approve the draft 2020 water monitoring report.
Perfect, thank you.
And I'll second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Any other discussion? All right, I will call the roll. Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Oknick,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. Thank you, Megan. And EOR, all right. Now, we have the item that we added, item B under old business. Steve had raised this question. We're still waiting for the board manager appointment from Washington County. So I think Steve was seeking some discussion about how to proceed with helping to move that forward, especially this evening's a good example of why it would have been nice to have another board member at our disposal, because Manager Anderson wasn't able to be here and Manager Oknick was fighting other issues. So, so go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, let me just give you a quick update on what the timing was been. As you know, Jim was really leaving probably almost the fourth quarter of last year, and he officially left the first of the year. Shortly thereafter, he submitted his application, and then he didn't hear back. And so then he called a couple people, and as of March, he had still not heard back. I had suggested that he write to the mayor to get support from the city of Forest Lake, and he did that at the end of January, but we're not sure whether they have replied yet. So that might be what's holding it up, but we're not sure. I talked to Jim today, I'm sorry, Chris today. And so that might be one thing that's holding us up right now, is that maybe the city hasn't responded to the county's request for support of the person that's been recommended. So that's probably the first thing we have to clarify before we jump on the county.
Okay.
So I guess what I thought I would recommend is that, and first of all, I don't know what the protocol is for us as board members to get involved in a county decision where we probably should be somewhat of an arm's length away. And I have to push this over to Chuck for some comment, but I think we could check with, I could call probably, I think her name is Soderline, and she coordinates the process and see what's holding it up and are we missing anything? And then, and if we haven't heard from the city, then I could have Chris call the city again and try to break that loose, or I could help him break it loose from the city so we can move forward on this.
Okay.
Right now, we're not sure what the holdup is because we still don't know whether the city responded or not.
All right.
That's kind of where we are.
I'll kick it over to Mike then and let him tell us where he's at. So where are we at, Mike?
Well, managers, my history is such that I tend to not try to be very involved in board appointments because somebody might suggest that I'm trying to influence the outcome of the board makeup. So I generally only try to interject myself when requested. So, but given the email from earlier today, I did send a note over to Melissa Sutherland asking her what the status was, and I've not received a response. So she just may be out for the day as well, but there's no kickback. I didn't get anything saying out of office. So, but yes, it is a very lengthy process. And in fact, Jim's last date was, and I'm sure Jessica would know, I think was around November 10th that he officially departed, I think, or about was this last board meeting. And he had sent the letter to the board, I think in late September, notifying us that he was moving out of the district. And then he communicated that to the county. So they've known at least since the early October. And we, of course, made several attempts to do some recruiting, which without any success. And then at what point Chris submitted his application, I'm not at all familiar with that. I have not received that or have any information, but, but I'll just see if I get a response by the end of the day tomorrow. Otherwise, I think a phone call could be appropriate as well. So.
That sounds good, Mike. If you can let us know if there is a holdup like with the city, then I think Chris and I could talk to Maya and see if she can't break that loose for us, because it's been 2 months since he called her, so.
So he submitted his application in January?
Well, actually, what turned out is, the county didn't come up with anything and we didn't come up with anything, just brainstorming. So we decided to send a request to our 400 members, see if anybody was interested.
Mhm.
Well, before that even went out, Chris normally sends it out for us because he's our technician, so to speak. And he said, hey, I'm interested. So I said, fine, why don't you apply and we won't send it out? Because he was really interested. I talked to him about it and he had a lot of interest in working with us. So then he submitted his application then early January.
Okay.
I gave him the formats, told him, what the process was and, what he should talk about, his background and that kind of stuff. So he went through all that. And then later on, then he had not contacted the city. So I suggested he also contacted the city to get their support. So thinking that might break it loose from the county also. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay. All right, so we're working with Alyssa. We'll find out what comes back from that path, and then we'll see if we can keep the process moving here. But
Chuck, are you okay with us contacting the mayor, Chris and I, to try to break this loose if that's where the bottleneck is?
Yeah, well, I think that's fine. It's less a legal matter and more a matter of your judgment. As to the relationships, it's always fine, I think, to communicate to the county board and the relevant cities simply the fact that the district is impeded in doing its work due to the vacancy. It's not a political commentary, but beyond that, you're at liberty to seek to push the matter forward as well as you can. There isn't really much from a legal point of view that mandates the county board going forward on any particular schedule. It's really up to them. There would have been if it were a matter of Manager Dibble's term expiring, but when a manager vacates in the middle of a term, it's really just up to the county to proceed forward on their own sense of urgency. I would just add, you referenced the support of the city. It's not necessary. If there were a risk of other cities or Forest Lake submitting a list of candidates, then we do have the somewhat odd statute. You'll recall that it would be important for Chris to make sure that he is on a list submitted by the city. But if Chris is really the only present candidate, that isn't really a concern, though the city's support obviously could help advance the matter.
It's my understanding, talking with Fran and the commissioners, that they prefer to have the city support whoever's going to support whatever candidates come forward. So that's why they were interested in getting it. They just don't want to make the decisions themselves. They want the city, I believe, to have a stake in it also. So that's why they request that. And that's probably why it's not going to move forward until the city does submit something.
okay, well, hopefully we'll hear something back from Alyssa soon. So
Just let me know, Mike, and then we'll take it from there and see if we can't get it moving.
all right. I guess we're down to summary and approval of board direction. Chuck, did you note anything for this evening?
Mr. Chair, I did not, aside from the discussion about Chris's candidacy.
Yeah. And I think Mike's done what he can do for now, and we'll keep moving it from there based on what we can hear back. So, all right, then I believe a motion to adjourn is in order.
I'll move that we adjourn.
All right.
A second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Extensive discussion on the motion. All right.
Nah.
I'll call the roll. Manager Schmaltz.
Aye.
Manager Oknick,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right, that must be a record. 59 minutes.
Wow. Thank you all. Good meeting.
Thanks.
You.
Keep it up, John. You got a good trend going this year.
Get a standard.
Yeah.
Today.